à l'extérieur du Golkos, mais c'est une mesure sur le papier qui n'a jamais eu de suite. Donc la maladresse, l'arrogante maladresse des Allemands, en quelque sorte, ils vont la payer cher bientôt, puisque les populations vont se redresser contre eux.
Et la chose extraordinaire, c'est qu'ils n'ont pas compris que c'est exactement pour cela que les généraux blancs avaient perdu pendant la guerre civile. Ouais. Parce qu'ils n'avaient pas compris que les gestes de Lénine, immédiatement après la Révolution, la terre aux paysans, avaient été énormément populaires. Et puisqu'ils ne promettaient pas la terre aux paysans pendant la lutte, pendant la guerre civile, c'est une des raisons pour laquelle ils ont perdu.
Voilà. Et l'Italie, qui est notre deuxième objet de réflexion, à cette époque, on a vu qu'elle se porte mal. Et je voulais vous demander, comme historien et comme gamin que vous étiez, quel était le sentiment national, quel était le sentiment à cette époque de la guerre?
En 1941, le sentiment national, dans une certaine mesure, résistait. Le débâcle du sentiment national, c'est 42, bien entendu. Mais, comme vous venez de le dire, 41 avait été dur, parce que l'Afrique orientale avait été perdue. Après tout, il ne faut pas oublier que l'Éthiopie avait été le terrain même sur lequel le fascisme avait gagné son consensus national 5 ans avant. Et la perte de l'Éthiopie était beaucoup plus que la perte d'un territoire colonial, mais la perte d'un véritable symbole, le symbole du ralliement de la nation italienne au fascisme, 35-36, à cause de la, comment dirais-je, de cette ambition enfin accomplie qui était l'Afrique orientale, etc. Par conséquent, en 1941 déjà, avec le départ des derniers soldats italiens d'Abyssinie, d'Éthiopie, il y a une grosse chute, comment dirais-je, du sentiment d'espoir. Bien entendu, les choses en Libye ne se passaient pas aussi mal que ça. La situation en Libye n'était pas encore préjugée.
Ce qui est curieux, c'est que Hitler, dont on a les entretiens quelquefois quotidiens, parle cette semaine, n'est-ce pas, lorsque les Italiens se rendent en Éthiopie, les dernières troupes de l'Italie. Et il émet un diagnostic tout à fait curieux. Il dit ceci, en substance, on ne peut plus avoir confiance dans l'Italie. D'abord, dit-il, c'est un pays où les généraux et l'armée, au fond, se bat pour le roi. Ensuite, c'est le centre de l'international catholique, à Rome, avec le pape. Ensuite, l'opinion est peut-être fasciste, mais l'État ne l'est pas suffisamment, ça va craquer.
Il n'avait pas tort, c'était pas stupide au fond. Et il y a une chose dans les actualités italiennes qui m'a beaucoup frappé, je reviens aussi à cet épisode que je vous racontais tout à l'heure à propos du métropolite de Volokolamsk, cette figure le clergé au service de la patrie. Il y a dans les actualités italiennes à un certain moment l'inauguration d'une petite chapelle de la Légion fasciste avec, si je ne me trompe, le patriarche de Venise, qui est un personnage important. Alors, pourquoi montre-t-on cela dans les actualités? Parce qu'on veut faire voir que l'Église est du côté du régime, du côté du parti et de l'État. Mais est-ce que l'Église était véritablement du côté du régime et de l'État? Je crois qu'Hitler n'avait pas tort. L'Église était déjà méfiante et très peu chaleureuse. Par contre, en Union soviétique, en Russie, l'Église était tout à fait du côté de la patrie.
Un joli paradoxe. Alors, on va voir maintenant les actualités anglaises, qui vont évoquer, bien sûr, les mêmes événements. Ce sera tout à fait parallèle, notamment à propos du siège de Tobruk, puisqu'on l'a vu filmé par les Italiens, et maintenant on va le voir analysé par les Anglais.
The opening of the Tanks for Russia week sees Monsieur and Madame Maisky at a large tank factory in the Midlands. Following a tour of inspection, a Valentine tank, draped with the Soviet flag, is presented to them. In thanking the workers, the Russian ambassador says,
"May I express my gratitude to all those who contributed to the making of this very excellent machine. You may be assured that this good machine will not rust in idleness. Immediately after it will come to my country, it will go into the battle line. The more you will send, and the quicker you will send to Russia these good machines, the earlier will come our victory. More thanks.
And to the loud cheers of the workers, away goes Stalin to play its part in the Battle of Russia. The King and Queen extend a royal welcome to the King of Greece, who arrives in England from South Africa. King George of the Hellenes and his ministers are here to establish direct contact with the British government. The Prime Minister is also there to greet His Majesty. The informal reception on the platform ends with a brief inspection of the Grenadier Guards who form a guard of honor to the fighting King of Greece. Five French boys who escaped from France in a canoe and landed at Eastbourne after 30 hours in the Channel are the guests of Mr. and Mrs. Churchill in the gardens of number 10 Downing Street. To celebrate the occasion, a bottle of champagne is opened, and the Prime Minister gives the toast, Vive la France. These brave young lads made a bold escape from the Brittany coast in order to come to England to join the Free French forces. Their courage has been rewarded. They're 100% de Gaulle men now.
Sergio Romano, cette petite scène en dit beaucoup plus qu'on ne peut le croire. Septembre 41, c'est une date qui a dans nos mémoires une force extraordinaire parce que c'est à cette date-là que commencent les fameux messages personnels adressés à la résistance française, encore très éparpillée, plus forte en zone nord qu'en zone sud à ce moment-là, n'est-ce pas? Et comme les Anglais et Londres ne pouvaient pas communiquer avec ces petits groupes qui étaient encore éparpillés, la radio anglaise a prêté son antenne aux Français, à De Gaulle, et ont commencé ces fameux messages personnels. Lisette va bien, Lisette va bien, c'était le premier. En septembre 41, justement. Et alors le second, Louis XIV dit non à Vercingétorix. Alors au début, on ne savait absolument pas ce que ça voulait dire. Je l'ai appris plus tard, moi, quand j'ai été moi-même résistant, n'est-ce pas? J'attendais un message et je savais, j'attendais un certain message qui voulait dire quelque chose de précis au Vercors, mais au début, on ne savait pas. Et ces messages vont être de plus en plus nombreux. C'est le signe que la résistance en France est éparpillée, puisqu'on ne peut pas la joindre, mais qu'elle commence à se lever très fort côté de Gaulle.
The USS North Carolina heads out to sea to engage in her firing tests. As the 35,000-tonner reaches the proving ground, every man goes to action stations, and the giant warship prepares to test her ability to withstand the strain of her own guns. Her secondary armament open up. Now the big fellows are put through their paces. For 4 days, the new battleship goes gunning. The climax comes at nightfall when 9 16-inch and 10 5-inch guns fire a spectacular salvo. Yes, the Carolina's going great guns. In the harbor lie the now rusty relics of Italian vessels, a veritable graveyard of ships sunk during attacks on Tobruk when it was held by the enemy. So complete is our occupation and defense. The battle-scarred streets in the town are gradually crumbling away under constant attacks by enemy aircraft. This is Admiralty House. Not quite as imposing as Whitehall, but it's got a grand outlook. Nearby are the offices of the Tobruk Truth, the garrison's own news sheet, which appears daily, despite occasional Nazi attempts to put it out of circulation. The editorial offices have admittedly had many moves. And the Australian sergeant editor makes a sign with his fingers, rather like the Victory V, and carries on with the job. The one-time Italian hospital is now used by us for any of our casualties. One of the outpatients is a pet donkey which stopped a bit of shrapnel. Make no mistake, Tobruk is important. It lies at the extreme western end of a strategic line which runs for 1,500 miles across 6 countries to an eastern extremity on the Caspian Sea. Reaching out over 100 square miles of desert, our perimeter defenses make it an impregnable fortress. The entire defensive system is below the surface of the earth. These are some brave men of Tobruk. From the air, since Tobruk became beleaguered in the spring. Out among the defensive posts on the perimeter, within easy reach of enemy guns, is a group of men forming a unique gun crew. A number of army cooks have got themselves a couple of Italian guns, and styling themselves the bush artillery, lob over hundreds of rounds into the jerrys and wops. The guns have no proper sights left on them, so they draw a bead on the enemy lines with a pole and let fly. And what's more, they've done a lot of damage. From sunken gun positions, other artillerymen who can't cook open up against the enemy. An indication of our accurate fire is shown by these pictures of an Italian oil dump going up as a result of a direct hit. In many a section around Tobruk, wreckage of Italian planes, lorries and tanks are all that remain of a much-vaunted fascist army that met decisive defeat. Tobruk is firmly in the hands of warriors such as these, an army of matchless men from the British wealth of nations whose dogged heroism deserves more than just a passing paragraph. Their heroic stand is writing a page in history as vital as any which hit the headlines. The historic session of the Inter-Allied Conference in St. James's Palace, at which representatives of 11 nations and the Empire adopt the Atlantic Charter. Mr. Eden presides.
Gentlemen, before I introduce the formal business, I would like to discuss and secure your approval of the procedure which we contemplate. I propose to introduce a resolution regarding the recent statement issued by the President of the United States and our Prime Minister, Mr. Churchill, and to invite its acceptance by the Allied governments.
To the Council chamber comes the echo of those momentous words uttered during the historic August conference on the high seas, that all men shall be enabled to live in freedom from fear and want, and that aggressor nations shall be disarmed. Approximately 350 miles away from German-occupied Crete, Imperial troops arrive at Cyprus, the British island in the eastern Mediterranean. Lying off the Syrian coast, the island is of immense strategic importance, and the work of strengthening its defenses goes on every day. Our cameraman in the Middle East sends us these pictures of activity as men, motor transport and equipment arrive at one of the ports on the island. Much of the island is rocky, but in the central plains, such as here, engineers, assisted by local labor, are setting new guns into their emplacements. Much of the work is done without modern equipment, but the job is expertly done nevertheless. Any German attack on Cyprus will indeed prove a hazardous adventure. Lieutenant General Cunningham, GOC in East Africa, arrives by plane at Zela, British Somaliland. At this frontier post, which lies on the border of French Somaliland, men of the King's African Rifles are on guard against the smuggling of foodstuffs into Vichy French territory. Shortly after sunrise, a bugler brings the dusky warriors onto parade each morning. These are the men who are responsible for the observance of the blockade, and right smartly do they carry out their duties. Like all company sergeant majors, the NCO has a magnificent vocal capacity and knows how to use it. He's detailing his men to take over from other frontier guards who have been on duty overnight. Conditions in French Somaliland are reported to be very bad. Vichy French deserters are continually arriving to join the Free French troops. In fact, the authorities are forcing many Djibouti inhabitants to cross the border in order to relieve the scarcity of food. A camel boy and 2 women are brought in after trying to run the blockade overnight. The British authorities have large supplies of foodstuffs ready for the Somalis, which will be made available as soon as the Vichy government may decide to play the game and help us to put France back where she was before the war. In the meantime, blockade running will get her nowhere. Although the tide of war is no longer surging in East Africa, there's still a lot of cleaning up to be done. During a visit to a Ministry of Labour training centre near London, the King and Queen see a number of students, many of them Indians, being trained in munition engineering. Work goes on as usual as their Majesties pause here and there for a friendly chat to the trainees. The entire lack of formality marks all royal visits to such important industries. The King and Queen know full well the necessity for uninterrupted output in all war material. And their friendly visits are an incentive to every man and woman so employed. The Indian students are playing a big part in this field of engineering, and their King Emperor has made it clear that their efforts do them credit. In the grounds of Buckingham Palace, the King inspects the company of Home Guards composed of members of the royal household and servants employed in the palace. King's men in every sense of the word, they're just as keen in their duties as hundreds of thousands of their fellow men who wear the same shoulder badge on their uniforms. Maybe the proximity of Wellington Barracks has something to do with their guardsman-like marching. But the Palace Home Guard certainly look a smart body of men. Companions of the Front. This is the name given to these Soviet women who, as ambulance girls and other auxiliary services, take part in frontline action with the troops. Their training now completed, the women are leaving the Kirov district of Moscow by motor lorry for the front. Lads under military age in the town of Gorky have organized a voluntary rail repair detachment to help in the work of maintaining the permanent way in their district. Rail communication in the Soviet is of vital importance, and these boys are doing valuable work, helping to get the rolling stock up to the front line. Further evidence of the importance of Russia's railways is to be seen in this news flash of an armored train going into action. The ironclad mobile fortress has picked out an enemy staff headquarters and completely destroyed it. For the first time in a newsreel, we see some dead Germans killed by the withering gunfire from the armored train. Here's an interesting story from the village of Budyanovsky, birthplace of Marshal Budyani. Kuban Cossack villagers parade before the aged mother of the Marshal as they set off for cavalry exercises. Direct descendants of the men who put Napoleon to flight, the Cossacks are second to none as horsemen. Not long ago, a number of German infantry were cut to pieces in a cavalry charge. Russian soldiers bring in a German deserter. He's Fritz Reiss, a Nazi soldier who has handed himself over as a result of having found one of the leaflet passes dropped by Soviet planes over the enemy lines. These leaflets invite Germans to give themselves up to the Red Army. So on the assurance of life and good treatment, Fritz Reiss, a former farmhand, with his pass carefully hidden away, slips over to the Soviet lines. Nazi pilot Emil Lochmann fell into Soviet hands in a different way. He was shot down after machine gunning women and children in a village. His first action after crashing was to try and rid himself of his Iron Cross and badges. Cross-questioning revealed the fact that his distinctions had been won for similar outrages in Norway and Greece. How typically German. And the big fight's on. An enthusiastic audience at the Albert Hall sees the welterweight championship of Great Britain fought out in a 15-round contest. Here are some of the highlights from the fight. In the fourth round, Roderick of the RAF rams in body blows and Danaher of the Irish Guards crumples up. Referee Barrington Dolby steps in and cautions Roderick for hitting low. The RAF man has been forcing the pace, obviously determined to hold his present title. They're back in the center of the ring now, mixing it properly. With Roderick still piling up points, in the 13th round, Danaher goes down with a hefty one. But the Irish Guardsman is on his feet again and fights on. Now Danaher's in trouble again. This time it looks like he won't make it. But again, the battling sergeant goes back into the fight. Roderick wins the Lonsdale belt outright, and the RAF Benevolent Fund benefits to the extent of nearly £6,000. The heroic city of Coventry is visited by the Prime Minister during a busy tour. Accompanied by the Bishop and Mayor of Coventry, Mr. Churchill walked through the ruins of the cathedral. Passing through the bombed areas, still bearing much evidence of the devastation wrought nearly 12 months ago, the Prime Minister is given a warm welcome by the fighting people of Coventry. At an aircraft factory visited later in the tour, Mr. and Mrs. Churchill meet some of the men, not least of all Test Pilot Henshaw, holder of the London-Cape London record, who are helping to produce a continuous flow of Spitfires. Now, for the first time, we see Air Commodore Winston Churchill. At Fighter Squadron 615, the Prime Minister visits the pilots of the squadron, of which he has been Honorary Air Commodore since 1939. It's here that we get a glimpse for the first time of one of the new Hurricanes mounting 4 cannons. If I may be permitted to say so, a picture of Mr. Churchill in his uniform would make a splendid recruiting poster for the RAF.
Sergio Romano, vous avez donc vu cette bataille de Tobruk, vue par les Italiens et par les Anglais. Comment vous réagissez devant ce parallélisme?
J'ai trouvé cela très intéressant. D'abord, c'est le même événement, c'est la même chose, avec 2 regards assez différents. Le regard italien me paraît assez conventionnel. L'Italie est une nation guerrière. Parfois, on le dit sérieusement parce qu'on n'est pas tout à fait certain que ce soit le cas. Mais enfin, c'est bien normal. Ça se comprend parfaitement. Par contre, le regard anglais m'a paru très amusant parce qu'il est à la fois plein d'humour et d'arrogance. Il y a un côté dans la façon dont les Anglais présentent l'ennemi, qui est à la fois aristocrate et plébéien. Je veux dire par là que les Anglais, les gentlemen, exploitent beaucoup les sentiments du peuple quand ils parlent de l'étranger. Il y a ce côté intelligemment xénophobe, comment dirais-je. Les Anglais, on les appelle les Allemands, on les appelle les Jerrys. Les Italiens, on les appelle les Wops, qui n'est pas tout à fait péjoratif, mais c'est quand même méprisant. Et là, il y a une chose qui m'a beaucoup intéressé parce que c'est une constante de la propagande anglaise. Vous voyez, quand on parle de l'ennemi, surtout en Angleterre, aux États-Unis, il faut bien établir le point de vue. Ou bien on dit que l'ennemi est fort, ce qui est très important, parce que quand on le bat, ça prouve qu'on est plus fort que lui. Et bien, en même temps, il faut dire aussi que l'ennemi est méprisable, parce que cela donne à vous une plus grande confiance en vous-même. Alors, ces 2 composantes un peu contradictoires, l'ennemi est fort, l'ennemi est méprisable, ça revient toujours dans la propagande anglaise, et les Allemands et les Italiens jouent les 2 rôles aux yeux des Anglais. Les Allemands sont forts, et on est plus fort qu'eux quand on les bat. Les Italiens sont un peu méprisables, ce qui vous encourage et vous donne de la confiance.
Oui. Eh bien, merci Sergio Romano de cette analyse très distinguée et très british. Mais comme ambassadeur, vous n'avez pas de patrie, vous représentez notre humanité avec élégance. Merci beaucoup.
Merci.